You're listening to the Wise Women Podcast, Episode 18. I'm your host, Alisha Wilford, founder of Yoke and Abundance, a creative leadership coaching business. This podcast is designed to inspire by introducing you to creative women living abundantly. I hope you'll savor Maia's words of wisdom as much as I have. This Saturday, we have a few spots left for my special Choosing Joy mini retreat. We all know you can't pour from an empty cup, and this half-day retreat is designed to help you refill. Imagine seated yoga, meditation, time for reflection, art journaling, a healthy lunch, a like-minded community, and of course, you'll get my signature can't-be-missed goodie bag. This is a way for you to pause and take time for self-care. Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is health care, work care, and community care. Refill and flourish in this mini retreat, Choosing Joy, with me this Saturday, December 8th, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Space is limited, it will sell out. So head over and reserve your seat today at yokeandabundance.com/retreats/. Now, on to today's guest, Maia Dery. Maia is near and dear to my heart for so many reasons. She's been my college photography professor, a mentor, my retreat leader, and a beautiful friend. Maia is an ocean-centered philosopher who encourages those around her to ask better questions. In July of 2017, I had the opportunity to attend one of her first Waves to Wisdom retreats, and it was a pivotal learning experience in my journey as a human and as a coach. I hope this interview will inspire you to ask better questions and think a little more deeply. But first, a word from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Triad Local First, a nonprofit membership organization based in Greensboro, North Carolina, with members throughout the Triad. Triad Local First's members include independent, locally owned retail shops, real estate agents, insurance brokers, marketing and advertising firms, accountants, dentists, restaurants, farmers, breweries, and more. TLF's mission is a commitment to building a strong local economy and a vibrant, unique community. The Buy Local season is in full swing with our next holiday stroll and trolley ride happening December 8th. For more information on how to support local independent businesses this holiday season and throughout the year, visit www.triadlocalfirst.com/buy-local-season. Maia Dery.
Hello there, Alisha.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Thank you for being a part of my podcast today.
Such a pleasure.
I am wondering if you could tell everyone a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're up to, and what's kind of brought you to this moment.
Okay. Well, I am 52 years old. I grew up in North Carolina, where I still live most of the year. And I have just recently left a 17-year career in higher education, teaching ostensibly art and interdisciplinary academic classes, but really helping people of all ages. The college where I worked has a substantial percentage of adult students, really helping people of all ages develop more creative, inspired visions for their lives. Mm-hmm. And shutter speeds and apertures and photographs were a good excuse for that, and hard philosophical, existentially demanding readings were good exercise in that quest. So I, for whatever reason, think I finished the work of that moment and have now gone into my own venture. And I'm a coach and retreat facilitator and public speaker, and just essentially serving, hopefully, a community beyond people who think of themselves as formal learners.
Yes. And you do that through ocean-centered wisdom practices.
Well, that's my favorite way to do it, and I think that's the most potent way that I have of acting as a guide and facilitator with people. It's the name of my business and project, really, I think of it as a big creative project, is Waves to Wisdom. And I learned to surf at 40, fulfilled a lifelong dream. And I don't know why it took me so long, but things just got in the way. And it really was transformative for me to learn how to surf. At that point, relatively mature in my creative development as a visual artist and as a teacher and mentor. And I thought I was a pretty creative person, and I think relative to my cohort, I really was. But surfing, I think, taught me just how far I had to go in terms of understanding the source and practice of creative existence in a culture which really discourages it.
Can you say more about that?
Which part of that?
A culture that discourages creative practice.
Yeah, sure. I think I tend to interact with people of a certain class, a certain level of privilege. Most of the people I hang around are college educated at least. Mm-hmm. Most of them can afford to fix their car when it breaks. Most of us have as much food as we need. I think for those people who I tend to spend most of my time with, at least at this moment in my life, we live in a culture that has a productivity fetish. And productivity is about producing products. Mm-hmm. And I think the production mindset is antithetical to the kind of open-minded, open-hearted, deep participation in what is already available.
Yes.
That is requisite for true creative acts, and even for real, true relationships with one another, with ourselves, and with the planet.
Because if we're just producing all the time, we don't have the ability to think about the deeper things.
We don't have the ability to think about it. We don't have the ability to just experience it before we think about it. It's to produce something, and I'm not knocking production wholly. I mean, certainly I love my products as much as anybody. I want my iPad to work. I don't actually have an iPad, but if I had one, I would want it to work. I want my iPhone to work. There are products that I absolutely love and build my life around. But the fetish of productivity, the idea that we all need to be focusing all of our life energy on producing things, means that we're never in a position to evaluate our products. We're never in a position to create a space where, maybe those products serve something beyond production.
Right. That makes sense.
Yes.
Well, something I do with all guests is animal spirit cards.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to do the animal spirit cards. And you're a little hesitant with the animal spirit cards.
Yes, and I can talk about why if you'd like.
I would love to know why.
Well, so your guests can't see us, but you've just picked out a finite number of cards.
I have.
Yes.
I don't even know how many are in here, to be honest.
Well, there's so many in a box. And so there are animals that somebody, I don't know who this person
Kim
is.
Kranz.
Okay. Decided needed to go on this card, and that somehow the spirit of that animal, and we could talk a lot more about spirit and spirituality if you want.
We may.
The spirit of that animal is somehow going to be evoked by a two-dimensional image and a name which we gave it on a card which came out of a box. And I think for me, the idea of spirit, which comes from the Latin spirere, which is to breathe, right? My interaction with animals is, it is something that tends towards the sacred for me.
Yes.
And so to interact with something called animal that comes through this human filter is sort of at its base a little bit like, I don't know about this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I use it like a game.
Okay. Let's
An
play a game.
icebreaker, a game, and sometimes a game that can share a new filter to look at what's going on in your life.
Okay.
So, if you could put your hands on the deck, close your eyes, and just take a couple big breaths. And whenever you're ready, you'll just cut the deck into 3 piles. And then restack however you'd like. Flip flip that top card over. Oh, you got the unicorn. So you didn't even get an actual animal.
No, I didn't get an actual animal.
And I think this is, Victoria Brownlee, our first podcast person, interviewee.
Yes.
Pulled this card. And so animal spirit cards, they're the earth, fire, wind, water elements. And the spirit cards are the creatures not of this earth. And maybe they come around, depending on how you view these cards, when grace needs to surround a situation. So the unicorn itself, and I'm just going to read to you what the unicorn says, and she aligns these with the 7 chakras. So this particular one has to do with the 6th chakra, the 3rd eye, which seems a little bit appropriate for you. But she says it's reconnecting to higher wisdom or divinity. It's difficult to see, hear, or think of a unicorn without immediately questioning if it's real. Did they ever exist? Perhaps long ago. The mind answers maybe, or it could be, or no way. This very contemplation explains our relationship to divinity and encapsulates our wavering belief in the unicorn. We wonder what divinity is. We wonder where our intuition comes from, and if we can really trust it. We think about a higher power, and our mind hesitates between yes, no, and maybe. Is it male? Is it female? Does it have a name or just a feeling? The unicorn card appears and wakes us up to curiosity about a higher self and divinity. It's a card of questioning, exploring, and contemplating the inexplicable. The mind's eye knows where there is something beyond our day-to-day life, a deeper dimension to our experience. The mind's eye reaches and reaches and reaches out to grasp something more. You are the unicorn, and you have begun your quest for answers. You began a long time ago, though.
Yes, I think just to pick up on the last word, answers, I don't know that I have ever been on a quest for answers, but I think I have always been on a quest for better questions to live.
I think that's really true of you. That's accurate.
Yes.
And and spirituality too.
Well, it's spirituality is a word that I have a long and complicated emotional history with, and I think I was raised in the South, in the Bible Belt, by a very liberal post-Catholic mother who was remarkably angry at her Catholic upbringing. The Catholic Church, especially in its form in the 50s and 60s when she was coming up, was profoundly misogynistic and patriarchal. She was just angry in retrospect for all of the lessons that she internalized. And so I was raised in that kind of reactive environment.
Right.
And so, as a youngster, for me, spirituality meant organized religion. And I was sure that I didn't want any part of that. And I had, a very ignorant, limited understanding of what organized religion was. And it was based on my experience and my mother's attitude, my internalized lessons in turn. And I have very slowly gotten over that and learned to not quite be so bigoted about everyone who identifies themselves as spiritual or, in fact, is a member of an organized religion.
Right.
That took a long time. And at this point, I think, for me, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm a little bit of a word geek. I was an English major in college, and I really enjoy tracing the evolution of words and concepts because I think they tend to, even more than spirit cards, they tend to prompt our thinking and craft our thinking, sometimes limit it. And so my relationship with spirituality has evolved as my relationship with the word has changed. And the fundamental aspect of spirituality that I think is so important is the etymological root. Ultimately, spirituality, the Latin verb from which it derives, is about breath. The Greek word, which is the equivalent, is pneuma, which referred not just to breath but to wind. And for me, that gets at the heart of what is sacred. the air that we breathe is the air that the planet breathes. We are breathing in what trees are breathing out, and vice versa. We are in this unending, reciprocal, numinous relationship with one another and with everything from which we emerged.
Yes.
The planet, the watershed, the stars. Carl Sagan said, something like, we are the stars contemplating themselves. I think for me, that is what's ultimate. That is what's important. That is what our culture discourages us maintaining contact with. So many of us literally run around all the time, and we don't take time to just breathe and understand the abundance of air. We don't take time, and this is more to my taste, my preference, we don't take time to really feel the unprecedented wealth that we all enjoy from being able to just get fresh water and drink it and know that we're not going to die of cholera.
Right, and that's honestly a limited resource to some extent.
Well, yeah, it's fresh water is absolutely a limited resource, and we can think of it as a resource, and I think that's useful, but it's much more than that. I mean, water, fresh water in particular, but really the water of the planetary system. You brought up a higher power in the unicorn reading there. Mm-hmm. It's I have no trouble getting my head around a higher power. The ocean is a much higher power. And for me, I don't actually need more than that to understand that I am part of a whole, that I am inextricably interconnected, not just with every other human, but every other thing on this planet. And I don't have to get into a disembodied place in order to know that.
Right.
Because I am mostly water, and that water was mostly some other entity right before it was me. And we're in Wilmington, North Carolina right now. The water that we're drinking has gone through 11 municipal treatment systems before it gets to us. And, untold numbers of animal bladders and, whatever the factories are throwing into it, we're dealing with. I mean, I'm a person of relative privilege, so I have a reverse osmosis filter. But, this water is me. I am mostly it. It's to think of myself as this bounded being that is not also all of these other beings, animate and inanimate. We think of them as inanimate, but rivers, I am a river in a way.
Yes.
And so for me, that sort of water-based ritual and practice really helps me live in that place, not just remind myself occasionally when I read, what for me are sacred texts.
Right.
But every time I take a sip of water, every time I go to the bathroom, I am participant in a way. I can't get away from it.
It's a closed circuit.
I don't need to remember to pray. These are sacred acts that are just a part of my embodied existence.
Can you talk about surfing as an embodied experience?
Oh my goodness, endlessly. So I have never been a particularly strong or agile or gifted athlete. And so I knew when I learned how to surf at 40, when I learned how to surf, I thought I was just learning how to surf to kind of check it off of some bucket list. I just turned 40. I felt like I needed a bucket list. I've never been a list checker offer. I tend to be a profoundly committed person in every respect of my life. And I just fell madly in love with it. And I knew when I started that I was never going to be good by any, measure that our culture tends to value, which has everything to do with youth and strength and usually male bodies. So I knew I wasn't going to be good in those ways. And that represented a kind of freedom that I think only comes with age. It's like, okay, I just get to suck at this. And that's beautiful. That's awesome. It doesn't matter. So I went into it like that. It took me forever to get any sense of agency, any sense at all that I was an agent working in collaboration with this higher power, the ocean and its waves and these distant storms. These waves are the local manifestation of these global forces. These storms far away make them. So it took a year. I think it took me 7 years before I really learned that I'm going to catch this wave and I'm going to turn it this way and I can see what's happening and I'm going to react. And that kind of, it was humbling. I don't think I really needed a lot more humility, but I certainly get it in spades every time I go surfing. And it was illustrative of what a creative process is at its root, which is a participatory relationship between a body and an environment, whatever that environment is. A participatory relationship in which the bounds of the body are not actually hard edges, but they're open membranes, and there are things coming in and going out all the time. And for me, surfing was a practice that allowed me to do all of the things that I did before in a way that was more open, more emotionally open, more intellectually open, that was more joyful, that was more immersive. And it really, there's nothing like a wave that's coming at you to shut your editor up, right? I mean, we all have this sort of second-guessing critical voice. Well, you don't have time for that when you're surfing. I mean, we've gone together, and so it really puts you in touch with who you are as a creative being when you have to react rapidly to changing circumstances. And the wonderful thing about it, at least in my case, and I think really in most people's cases, is it doesn't ultimately matter. You're going to fail more than you succeed.
Right.
Any creative process could be defined that way. It doesn't ultimately matter. You're going to fail more than you succeed. But the practice of working to achieve whatever it is that you're seeking in that moment, committing wholly to that practice that is the matter of it. That is the thing that matters.
Is that how you would define creativity?
I think creativity is undefinable. It generally indicates a sort of a line where this is here and that is there, and I think creativity can happen anywhere. I think creativity happens anywhere we are. It just automatically happens. At bottom, as you're perceiving the universe before you have words, you're being creative. I think rivers are creative. I think waves are creative. And it's, the question is not how do we define creativity for ourselves. The question is, how do we recognize it at bottom? How do we cultivate it? How do we let that relationship, that phenomenon, that interaction that's happening as we're perceiving the world, how do we let that take root in our lives and the lives ultimately of our communities and those we serve?
Yes, I agree. We were talking yesterday about when I was on your retreat in Costa Rica last year. So I had the privilege of going on your first Waves to Wisdom retreat, which was
so
phenomenal.
To have you there.
I hope everybody goes on your retreat in March because it's going to be awesome.
There are only room for 10 everybody. So
I hope at least I hope you have a waiting list out the door for that retreat. But every day you gave us a different word or theme to think about. And I asked you yesterday what your favorite was. And we talked a little bit about that. Can you talk a little bit about your favorite ocean-centered theme to think about?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think one of the things that, and all of the words that I gave you all are, part of my daily thinking and sort of narrative touchdowns for existing, but the one that I picked to talk about is the kind of play between and discernment of artificial barriers and healthy boundaries. So I think we, as I've referred to a couple of times, I think we have this artificial barrier constructed in our head where self ends and the world begins. And I think we have artificial barriers constructed in our head and in our culture between ourselves and others. And that could be just us and our spouse. It could be us and our neighbor, or us and these people who don't look like us. And these barriers are not entirely useless. They're useful in the way that all tools are useful.
Right.
But they're not ultimate. They're not what the tool is about. We have saws and hammers and drills, and we use them in order to make spaces in which magic and love and meaning can unfurl. They're not ends in themselves for most of us, unless you're the tool maker, in which case I hope you find ultimate beauty and meaning and purpose in the making of the tool. But I think we do get hung up on these barriers. And I was steeped in, I've spent most of my adult life in higher education, which is a place where artificial barriers are lauded in the form of the disciplines. And so the barrier between physics and poetry is an artificial one. It's not, I mean, this counter, this table is in some ways artificial. It's not to say it's useless. It's just to say that we just made it up, and that poetry and physics actually have everything to do with what it means to be us, the people who invented these tools. And we need both of them. We need to have some capacity with both of them. And of course we need people who are really good at one tool, because it takes however many 10,000 hours, if you believe that theory, to get masterful with that tool. But it doesn't mean that because you're the person who's the master of the saw, that the hammer is useless.
Right.
And that it has nothing to say or contribute. It has every bit as much to contribute to the overall picture of what it means to be a whole effective human in whole effective societies.
Yes.
So that's the artificial barrier part. And I think there are two universal solvents at this point, at 52, still learning. But as far as I'm concerned, the two universal solvents are love and water. And I think if you bring those to any barrier, you can dissolve it well enough to be able to see through it. And just to use an example, there's a very wonderful, it's got some issues, but just a wonderful documentary about surfing called Step Into Liquid. And there's this one vignette about kids from both sides of the Catholic-Protestant divide in Northern Ireland going surfing together. And they get out in the water and there's absolutely no difference between them. And I think that water is that way. And I think the segregationists were really onto something when they said, we're not going to let black people and white people swim together. Because if you let people swim together, they love each other. Mm-hmm. And so I think that this kind of, for me at least, this kind of ocean play is a way to help people dissolve these artificial barriers in their lives that keep them from recognizing what's hiding in plain sight.
Yes. Healthy
boundaries, on the other hand, are crucial. And a boundary is also something that, that kind of demarks an edge. And I think boundaries between what's okay and what's not okay are individually determined. And I think we as a group, as a culture, especially as women, we're not very good at recognizing and asserting, this is the edge of okay for me, and I'm not going to be a healthy being if this boundary is transgressed.
Right.
And boundaries can change over time, and mine certainly have. I'm, much less guarded now. I have to be much less guarded. I don't need it as much as I did when I was younger. And I'm a different being in this sort of post-fertile manifestation of myself, and so everything changes as you change. But I think that process of being able to discern what's a healthy boundary for me in this moment has to be as flexible and nimble as your ability to do something in response to an oncoming wave, because the world never stops giving you reasons to understand what your boundaries are.
Yes. Thinking about that and being in the moment. So some of the things that I like that make me feel like I'm in the moment are very physical activities. Can you talk about being in the moment and meditation with surfing?
Sure. I mean, surfing can be profoundly meditative in and of itself. In my experience, it's not the same thing. It's a different kind of meditation that strengthens different kinds of muscles. Surfing is, for me, a way to achieve a state of flow in which you lose track of yourself. So it's...
Mike Cheeks Me High wrote the book flow,
right?
Which is that state that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And these two fellas, Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, wrote a book called Stealing Fire, which they came up with a really good, I think, easily accessible set of characteristics of all flow states. Selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And richness means, in effect, changing dynamic circumstances. And surfing is really a place where I can achieve flow almost instantaneously. I mean, it just, I don't know what it is, but just getting in that water, it literally washes away just all the bullshit, whatever there is that's in your way in that moment. And it's a way, for me, surfing is a profoundly connective activity. I feel really native. I feel like I was born into a place and I am inhabiting that place. I feel like part of things, and and there are consequences for poor decision making,
right,
in surfing. So it's not the same as sitting on your mat, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's really up to you to be active in discerning consequences, right? So it's a different kind of situation. Now, sitting on the mat has proven crucial to me. It's a very, for me, and I've tried a bunch of different ways to meditate, and ultimately, to my chagrin, seated meditation really does help me in ways that nothing else has. And I'm not a very good sitter, so I have to do yoga first and get myself ready, get my mind ready. And I'm not, I'm by no means an empty vessel, but I've gotten much better at not reacting to my thoughts as if they were waves.
And I think that's the biggest misconception too around meditation, is that we will become, through meditating, we will become an empty vessel. Mm-hmm. But that's not really what it's designed for. It's designed to be okay with those waves that come up in our mind.
Absolutely. Just let them go by.
Yes.
You don't actually have to react to them. Unlike ocean waves.
Which you have to react
to. And both practices complement one another in, really, for me, powerful and instructive ways.
Yes. Maia, what's one project you're really excited to be working on right now?
Well, I'm really excited about Waves to Wisdom. I have been seeing coaching clients in this new context, free of grades and syllabi, which is so liberating, because we can really, get to the heart of what it is that the person wants to learn in this moment. My clients tend to do their homework with verve and energy, which is remarkable.
Exactly what you want out of a coaching student.
Yes. I mean, life intervenes, of course, at times, and I don't have to get fussy. I don't have to be beholden to some parent who's paying tuition in the back of my mind, and that's also liberating. So I'm really, I'm a little, at this point, I don't know of anything more meaningful than serving, and I don't know a more powerful way to serve than to do this thing, which I have sort of inadvertently stumbled on in my adulthood, which is to help people with their vision for their lives, not just develop it, but act on it, implement it.
And I would argue that you've certainly been doing that as long as I've known you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I accidentally did it starting in my late 20s. I got a job really for the community at an outdoor store, which is near and dear to both of our hearts, Townsend Bertram & Company in Carborough. And I just, my marriage to this wonderful young man was dissolving because I figured out that I was oriented towards women. It was hard to stay married to him no matter how awesome he was. And I was a professional photographer. It was pretty lonely in a lot of ways. Not the long-term relationships just were not there. I mean, had very short-term relationships. It was meaningful, but I'm such an extrovert. So I went and got a part-time job at Townsend Bertram & Company, and at that point, I'm in my late 20s, so I was 28, and most of the people who work there are 20, 22. Younger than I was, which it turned out was kind of the operative previously missing variable for me. And I think I had always been trying to play this role, but I didn't have enough confidence to develop my voice with my peers, and I don't think peers generally, especially adolescents, haven't rightfully enough confidence to listen to the voices of their peers. So it was really there that I started to recognize this pattern in myself, which is that we would be facing literally 15 size, I don't even know how to, bushels, that's good, 15 bushels of socks that needed to be tagged. I and one other person, and I would just say, okay, let's start. What's your story? How'd you get here? Where are you going? What's in the way? And by the time we got, through a few bushels of socks, I felt like I had done something useful with that day. And that was transformative for me. And then I wound up teaching. I never meant to be anybody's teacher, but it just happened through circumstance and, a fair amount of privilege. That's how we know each other. That's how we know each other. Yes, you took my Photo 1 class very early.
Your very first year of teaching. It was your second semester of
your
first year of teaching in Guilford.
Yep. So that was accidental, but turned out to be beautiful. And I'm just so grateful for those years in that little college where I had love and work in the same place, and so many people to serve deeply, and it was really good. It was hard to figure out that it was time to leave,
right?
But it was time, and now I've got the exciting creative task of figuring out how to engage a new audience and do the thing that I've always thrived on doing, and think some people can benefit from.
Yes. What's one thing you've done recently that's been really scary to do, but you took that leap and you decided to do it anyway?
Well, I mean, this happens every single time, literally, that I go surfing. Okay, so yesterday I went out with one of my dear friends, and she just rips. She was raised on gymnastics. She's very athletic and strong, and not as frightened as an animal as I am. And it's wonderful for me to go with her, because watching her take off on steep pitching waves makes it seem more possible. And so yesterday I took off on a steep pitching wave, and it was awesome and terrifying and fabulous. And I happened to make it yesterday. I don't always, but yesterday it worked. And in my life beyond that, the way that kind of practice is manifesting in my larger life is in this Waves to Wisdom, which is really what I'm doing besides surfing. I mean, that's essentially and loving my people. That's what I'm up to. And I think getting a little bolder about letting people know how I can help them is sometimes a little bit scary, because I think I've had the mouth of a teacher at this point. I mean, I've got the finely honed mouth of a teacher.
Yes.
And it's not that useful to me at this point. I need to learn how to both be assertive about what I can offer people, but also speak to them as peers. So it's that is a little bit scary, changing your language after almost 2 decades of practicing very hard to get a particular kind of language dialed in that served your audience. The older you get, the harder it is to learn new languages, and so that's a little nerve-wracking, but it's not nearly as nerve-wracking as taking off on a steep wave. So
yeah, I can imagine.
I'm up for it. Yeah.
So this is a question I've got from you, because I got to speak at one of your capstone classes a couple times, and you asked this question to everyone, and I think it's a brilliant question. But if you could go back and sit down, either your high school self or your college self, what would you tell the younger version of Maia?
I would tell the younger version of Maia, it depends on at which age I had encountered myself, honestly. I mean, I had an intellectual awakening my junior year of college after developing a crush on one of my instructors. That's what fueled it. And I think if I had encountered myself in high school, I would have said, look, I understand that school in some ways is just a fundamentally terrible experience, because requisite is this sitting still, being quiet thing. But that has nothing to do with books. That has nothing to do with the wisdom of these voices that you have access to because you can read, and the voice that you can develop because you can write. So just skip school, but read the books write the words. Don't conflate education and schooling. If I had gotten to myself as a senior in college when I'd had this intellectual awakening and I was well on my kind of voracious journey of learning, I would have said something to the effect of, don't be so terrified of loss because you're not going to be able to avoid it. It's just a part of life. And no one had died except for my stepfather when I was 13, which was, instructive, certainly, that somebody can die. But we had never been that close. And I lived in just mortal terror of separation from the beloved or the beloveds. And I even though I don't think I could have understood it at that point, I think it would have been useful for somebody to say to me, loss is an inevitable part of life and you can't avoid it. So don't let that determine what you do or don't do.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
Certainly.
Yes. Is there a piece of advice or a motto that you live by?
Holy cow, so many. And I think I'm constantly searching for more. I mean, I think I've already said it in his letters to a young poet. Rainier Murray Rilke wrote, it's time for you to live the questions. And he wrote that to a young poet, but I think we're all young poets in some capacity, metaphorically speaking, throughout our lives. We're all learning how to do this latest chapter. And hopefully we're doing it creatively. Right. And we're open to the fact that we don't know the answers and that the answers are not accessible to us at this moment and maybe ever. So I think live the question is probably as useful as any.
I agree. I like that one.
Yeah.
What else would you like to share?
Well, let's see. I think one of the products, one of the results of busyness and the gadgets that we have all come to be so intimately connected with is we've got flabby muscles when it comes to just sitting, and I don't necessarily mean sitting, I mean that metaphorically, but just being still in ourselves,
yes.
Even if our bodies are moving. And I think that one of the reasons that these retreats are so powerful, and the retreats are the latest manifestation of something which I have done in other contexts, guiding trips outdoors and mandatory experiential education moments with classes. These experiences in which you have to get out of yourself. You have to deal with the fact that it's raining or it's cold or the hill is steep or the wave is coming. They allow you to have a kind of a creative prompt that when you respond to it, the things that come out of your mouth, if you don't think too hard, are, to me, often profound, beautiful, guiding. And that moment of helping people, of guiding people through recognizing the wisdom that comes out of their direct experience is, if anything, it's the sacred task. It's the numinous process. Yes. It's the spiritual practice at this point in my life. And so this, the capacity to, the privilege to guide people on these retreats is really wonderful for me. And I would love to hear from you because we are in a production mindset. Right. People want to know, what do I get? They want to know, what is the product? What do I get out of this? And I have decided I need to respect that and tell them, because they're afraid they're going to go and nothing's going to happen, and they will have spent this precious time and money, and it's just going to be, like any trip to Costa Rica or any trip to the beach.
We touched on that yesterday when we were having tea in your backyard, right? I was saying how important travel is to self-reflection. So if you are stuck in your day-to-day experience, you can't get out of your production mindset and mode long enough to be. And then when you pair that with something like surfing and yoga, and you have waves coming at you, and you have to embody the experience and be in communion with nature, profound things happen. And I don't know that you can describe that and package it in a neat little bow, but if you want to get outside your comfort zone, and if you value growth, which personally growth is a core value of mine, so I look for experiences that will prompt me towards growth, which Waves to Wisdom is certainly a growth experience. That's what you're going to get.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that perspective of getting outside of your normal routines and your normal sensory inputs is crucial. It's central. It and so many people, not just individuals, but groups of people who are wrestling with these seemingly intractable problems, are probably not able to achieve innovation. At least this is what my experience has borne out, because they have the same sensory inputs. If you keep going into the same room and looking at the same people and doing the same things, you're probably going to keep getting the same results, the same conflicts, etc. So I do think that's true. And a fair question, if you were the person who was trying to convince somebody that a Waves to Wisdom retreat was right for them, and and they were suspicious or not entirely certain or scared, I think there are two fair questions that come up frequently is, well, why wouldn't I just go surfing in Costa Rica? Why would I go on this retreat, right?
Yeah.
And what if I'm physically afraid that I can't do it? It just seems so hard.
I was terrified. I'm still terrified. You're like, let's go surfing today. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'll just take my camera and take pictures of you. But I think that is part of what you're providing, is you're providing a safe environment, and then you're giving that reflection time afterwards. So you're teaching people to ask better questions of themselves, of each other, of those around them. And a really big part of this is you're teaching people how to fail fast and hard and over and over and over again in order to learn. And that's not something that's lauded in our society. Yet the only successful people I've ever seen are the ones that have failed over and over and over again. So many of the coaching clients that I work with are scared of failure, and it holds them back from so many things. But unless you're willing to fail in whatever ugly way you can personally imagine, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be innovative. You're not going to be creative. I mean, I think you've mentioned it 3 different ways already in our conversation today about how important failure is. But if you just fail and aren't able to reflect back with someone about how you failed, you might miss the lesson. And that's the importance.
Yeah, you might miss the lesson, and even more crucially, because we're just here for a minute, you might miss the joy. Yes. I mean, we have so much, we have a horror of failure. And listen, failure is not always a good option.
No.
And I don't want failure, if I don't want my surgeon,
to fail.
Failing fast and failing forward. I don't want that. And I think the issue is really when you are in a situation that calls for creativity or innovation. And failure doesn't have to be terrifying. It's not a mortal blow. It is absolutely requisite. It must happen for creativity to take place, to unfold, to emerge. And that to me, the thing that I would add to what you said, and thank you very much for that, is just that playful joy, because creativity can be playful, and at times it's heartbreaking, and sometimes it's discouraging, but it doesn't have to be. Right. And that's the beautiful thing about this kind of ocean play. And it's not, we're not out there in 10-foot waves.
Right.
It can be pretty tame, and it's not, in my experience, it's not absolutely necessary that you take the surfboard out if you don't want to. And there were some participants that decided not to take the surfboard out every day. And and I think really it's that involvement with the ocean that I hope to add guidance to in order to help people dissolve artificial barriers, discern healthy boundaries and develop their creative muscles so that they can, figure out a better vision for their lives and ultimately serve their families and community.
Yes. I know that yoga is an important part of your life.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite yoga pose?
Oh my goodness. Well, I suspect that my favorite yoga pose, like the yoga pose that I love doing the most, is Warrior Two.
Okay, so can you describe Warrior Two for the people listening that might not know what Warrior Two is?
You're facing forward. You have one foot behind you and one foot in front of you, and your forward foot is directly under a bended knee.
Yes.
And your body, while you are facing forward, your body is to the side. And so your hands are spread, pointed forward and back. Your hand is extending over your bent knee. And I think it's that combination of the little bit of twist and the solidity of the foundation and the vigor required of the pose. It's for me, it's a beautiful combination of forward and sideways, and it's an expansive pose. It's an extroverted pose. I just think it's pretty egocentric. I feel like myself in Warrior Two. Yeah.
Able to take up space.
And you're pointing forward and backward at the same time. You're not forgetting any of the moments.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how do you live a life of abundance? Well,
it's impossible for me to answer that question without noting my privilege. I have always lived a life of abundance, I think because of the accident of my birth country and my parentage and my access to education and clean drinking water and no malaria and many of those things. But I know plenty of people who have access to those same things and they don't live a life of abundance. They live a life of scarcity. So I think for me, living a life of abundance gets back to that you got to have rituals. You've got to have practice. You've got to remind yourself. You've got to remember the dismembered parts that sit between you and the fact that, holy cow, I mean, it was that we won the genetic lottery by just getting born.
Right.
In the first place. The odds against us being here are incredible. And as troubled as we are in this moment as a species, and I do think this is, we are at a crux point, and I do think we have an obligation, as to quote Carl Sagan again, I do think we have an obligation as a species to survive, an obligation to the universe. As troubled as we are at this moment, I don't think there's any other point in history where I would have chosen to be born. I mean, just given who I am, it just, the level of freedom that I enjoy to be myself. I'm a woman. I'm not a heterosexual woman. I am, free to love whom I choose in this culture. I can go surfing if I want. I can go surfing by myself. I don't need a father or brother or husband to, co-sign for a loan or, drive my car. And I'm really, I do think that historical perspective is crucial, not just for an engaged and effective citizenry, but for just a personal feeling of abundance.
Yes.
And agency. You realize that, most of this stuff that we have, including our system of government, even though it appears to be under assault, it's just really ultimately a few people who crafted the ideas and took the steps when they had access to power and privilege to give us the things, for better or for worse, that we have. And that's what it's going to take to make change, is creative, inspired people who can get over the fact that they sometimes hate each other and that they're serving an ideal larger themselves.
Yes.
Than themselves. Jefferson and Adams hated each other at times and ultimately loved each other because of their shared experience. I think that, I'm focused on two men and two, great men, in quotes. But I think, even just learning the history of peoples or the history of disease or any kinds of historical perspective like this, I think can help with a sense of abundance, especially in our culture. And in this era, if you don't like to read, you don't have to. You can listen to podcasts or, watch well-documented movies. There's lots of stuff that you can do. But I think that historical perspective, for me, is crucial to a life of abundance.
Maia Dery, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alisha. It's been such a pleasure.
It's an honor to get to do this. Thank you.
Certainly.
I hope you were inspired by Maia's words of wisdom. If you've enjoyed this podcast, head over to iTunes, give us a review, and then please remember, sharing is caring. And every time you share this podcast with a friend that could use a dose of inspiration and wisdom, you make it possible for us to keep bringing wise words your way. Check out our website, yokeandabundance.com, for more words of wisdom, creativity tips, and information about my group and individual coaching programs. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our mailing list and don't forget to register for this Saturday's upcoming mini retreat with me, Choosing Joy, on December the 8th. A huge thank you to our sponsor, Triad Local First, and my wonderful editor and producer, Ira Sterling at Julia Sound Recordings. Remember, every one of us has wisdom within. Keep sharing your words of wisdom because you never know who you'll inspire.